First story, the soldier's disappearance. Vietnam, 1970. I still can't wrap my head around what happened to me, and I've tried. Believe me, I was just doing my job like any other soldier out there in Vietnam in 1970, but what I experienced goes beyond what words can do justice. It all started on a hot, humid day, one of those days where the air feels like it's thick enough to cut through. My unit was out on a standard patrol, no different from any other day. We were making our way through dense jungle, the kind that feels like it's alive, constantly shifting and groaning beneath your boots. I was focused, paying attention to every rustling noise and shadow that could have been enemy soldiers. But then something changed. It wasn't dramatic at first, it was just an odd feeling, like I was being watched. I couldn't shake it. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I couldn't tell if it was paranoia or if something real was happening. I was so sure of it, though. I remember looking at my buddy to my left, and for a split second his face didn't look like his at all. I brushed it off, probably just fatigue messing with my mind. But that wasn't it. What happened next still terrifies me when I try to think about it. We were walking through this clearing. The sun was beginning to dip low, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch forever. The next thing I remember is the ground beneath my feet felt like it wasn't even there anymore. I don't know how to explain it, but one second I was standing there, and the next I was gone. Like someone just pulled me out of that moment, out of that place. The jungle disappeared, and I was surrounded by nothing. It was like I was floating in some sort of void, the air thick and still. No sounds, no movement, just complete silence. I couldn't even hear my own breathing. And then, without warning, I was slammed back into reality. I fell hard onto the ground, a dry, cracked earth beneath me, and when I opened my eyes, I wasn't in Vietnam anymore. I was in a place I didn't recognize. There were no trees, no jungle, just desert, a barren wasteland. It didn't feel like anything I had ever seen. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't work right. Everything was foggy, distant. I couldn't remember how I got there. My mind was a blank, and the only thing I could feel was fear, deep, gnawing fear, a sense that something terrible had just happened, and I had no control over it. I tried calling out, but my voice didn't seem to travel. No response, no answer, just the oppressive silence that hung over everything. And then I started walking. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't just stand there. I had to move. The sun hung low in the sky, casting an orange hue over everything. As I stumbled across the barren land, something caught my eye. It was a figure, a person. At first I thought it was another soldier, someone who could help me figure out what was going on. But as I approached, I realized it wasn't anyone I recognized. They were standing perfectly still, just staring at me. I could barely make out any features. Their face seemed blurry, almost like it was shifting. I called out to them, but they didn't respond. It felt like an eternity before I snapped out of the trance-like state I was in. I turned around to walk away, but as I did, I noticed something odd. I wasn't alone. There were more of them. Figures, standing in the distance, watching me, all of them unmoving. Their forms blurred, indistinct, but I could feel their eyes on me, and it sent a chill down my spine. The longer I stood there, the more unnerving it became. It was as if the entire world around me was wrong, twisted in some way that I couldn't quite grasp. My heart started to race, my breaths coming quicker as I backed away from the figures. It was almost like I could feel them closing in on me, even though they remained perfectly still. There was a pressure in the air, something heavy pressing down on me from all sides. I turned and tried to run, but it felt like I was moving in slow motion, like my feet couldn't keep up with my mind. The ground beneath me felt unstable, and with every step I took, I felt myself sinking deeper into the earth. Panic surged within me. I kept running, but the landscape seemed to stretch on endlessly, and no matter how far I ran, I wasn't getting anywhere. The silence, the emptiness, it was suffocating. I could feel my sanity slipping, but just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I heard a sound I had no business hearing, a low hum, almost mechanical, but not quite. It was coming from above. I looked up, and that's when I saw it. At first I thought it was a plane, maybe a helicopter. But it wasn't. It was something else. It was massive, hovering above me with a soft, steady hum, a craft that didn't belong in this world. It was dark, metallic, almost gleaming in the fading light. I couldn't take my eyes off of it. The air seemed to warp around it, and as it hovered closer, I felt this strange sensation wash over me. Like a static charge, the hairs on my skin standing up, a cold sweat forming across my brow. The craft just hung there, silent now, but I could feel its presence in every fiber of my being. I didn't know if I should run or stay, but something inside me told me that running would be useless. I was trapped, stuck in this desolate place with nowhere to hide. And then, as if in response to my fear, a beam of light shot down from the craft, surrounding me in a blinding glow. My body stiffened, and I couldn't move. I wanted to scream, but no sound escaped my mouth. The world around me twisted and bent as the light pulled me upward. I couldn't fight it. It was like my body had no control anymore, like I was being dragged by some invisible force. The next thing I knew, I was inside the craft. I couldn't remember how I got there, but I was suddenly surrounded by these figures. They weren't human, not in the way we understand it. They were taller, thinner, with elongated limbs and faces that were almost too smooth, too perfect. Their eyes were black, deeper than any human eyes, voids that seemed to pull in everything around them. I couldn't look away. It felt like they were inside my mind, picking apart every thought, every fear. They didn't speak, not in the way we do. Their communication was more like an impression, a feeling that washed over me. They wanted something from me, but I didn't know what. I could feel their presence pressing against me, suffocating, overwhelming. They surrounded me, their eyes never leaving mine, and I felt an intense sensation of cold, like I was being frozen from the inside out. Time seemed to stand still. Or maybe it was just that I couldn't tell how long I had been there. I don't know how long it lasted, but I remember the moment it stopped. Everything went quiet again, and the next thing I knew, I was back in the jungle. I was back where it all started, but everything was different. The air felt heavier, the jungle denser than before. I could hear the sounds of birds, the rustling of leaves, but it was muted, as if I was underwater. The heat of the day had turned into an oppressive, suffocating weight, and I felt disoriented, like I had been dropped back into my body without warning. I didn't know how much time had passed or where I had gone, but one thing was clear: nothing was the same. I tried to move, tried to take a step, but my legs were weak. My whole body felt like it was moving through molasses. My mind was a blur, and for a moment I thought maybe I was still dreaming, or that I had just passed out from exhaustion. But the fear that gripped me in the pit of my stomach told me that this wasn't a dream. It was real. The cold sweat on my brow, the pounding in my chest, those were real. I didn't know where to go, what to do. I tried to call out to my comrades, but the words wouldn't come. My mouth was dry, my tongue thick, like I hadn't spoken in days. I looked around, searching for any sign of familiarity, but the jungle felt foreign, like it had shifted while I was gone. Then, out of nowhere, I heard something. It wasn't the usual sounds of the jungle, no birds, no insects. It was a low hum, like the sound of machinery, distant but undeniable. I froze. My heart started racing and I turned in the direction of the sound, desperate for something, anything that would make sense. That's when I saw it again. The same craft, hovering high above the treetops. I could barely believe my eyes, but it was there. The same sleek metallic shape, glowing faintly under the setting sun. It didn't make sense. I had just been inside. How could it be here again? And why had I been brought back? The hum grew louder, the craft seeming to shift in the air, almost as if it was aware of my presence. I couldn't look away. It felt like it was calling to me, drawing me in again. The fear in my chest grew, but at the same time, there was something else, something darker that whispered in the back of my mind, something that said this wasn't over, that I hadn't been returned by accident. It felt intentional, like they were watching me, waiting for something. I had to get away, but my body wouldn't cooperate. I couldn't move fast enough. I forced my legs to move, my feet stumbling through the thick undergrowth, desperate to escape the sight of the craft. But it didn't matter. It was as if the world had become a maze, the jungle closing in on me, trapping me in its grasp. Every step I took seemed to pull me further into its web, and then, suddenly, I was back where I started, standing in that same clearing where I had first disappeared. I looked around, hoping for something to make sense, but everything felt wrong. The trees were the same, but their shadows were longer now, and the air was thick with a strange, almost oppressive energy. I could feel something watching me from the edges of the clearing, but when I looked, there was nothing there. The craft was gone, but I knew it hadn't left. It was still out there, somewhere waiting for me. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. Something was in the clearing with me. Something that wasn't human, something that had been there all along, watching from the shadows. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. Its eyes on me, its presence suffocating, pressing in. From all sides, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think straight. The fear gripped me, and I had no choice but to wait, not knowing what would happen next. The minutes, hours maybe, passed in a haze, but they felt like an eternity. The air seemed to grow colder as I stood there, rooted to the spot, my eyes scanning the jungle around me. I didn't dare move. I couldn't. It felt like I was being watched from every direction, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on me. The silence was deafening, but at the same time, there was a constant hum beneath it. Like something electronic, something that wasn't supposed to be there. My skin crawled, my every nerve on edge. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed by fear, but it felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something. And then, without warning, everything changed again. A figure emerged from the trees, one of those creatures. I couldn't tell if it was the same one I had seen inside the craft, but I knew it was one of them. It was tall, too tall, and its form was distorted in a way that made my stomach twist. Its eyes, those dark, endless pits, were locked onto me, and I could feel its presence invade my mind as if it were reading my thoughts. It didn't move at first, just stood there, observing me. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body was frozen. I couldn't even look away. I was trapped in its gaze. The creature took a step forward, and it was like the air around me thickened, becoming almost suffocating. It didn't speak, not in words, but in a way I can't explain. It communicated with me. I felt its intentions, its purpose, and it was like a wave crashing over me. It wasn't hostile, but it wasn't comforting either. It was just watching, studying. I could feel its cold, alien presence filling the space between us. There was no warmth, no empathy, just the cold, calculating awareness that it was in control. It moved closer, and suddenly the world around me seemed to distort. The jungle faded away, and I was once again enveloped in that same strange, void-like feeling from before. The figures were back, standing in the distance, their blurry forms surrounding me. I tried to move, to break free, but it was like my body wasn't mine anymore. I couldn't tell if I was still in the jungle or if I had been transported somewhere else. My mind was foggy, my thoughts disjointed. The creature's presence seemed to pull me deeper into this distorted world, and I felt myself sinking, drowning in the sensation of being nowhere at all. When I finally came to my senses, I was back in the clearing. I don't know how much time had passed, but I wasn't alone anymore. My comrades, my unit, were there, looking at me as if nothing had happened, as if I had just been standing there the entire time. But I knew something was wrong. The fear, the sense of unease hadn't left me. It was like I had returned to the same place, but I wasn't the same anymore. I tried to explain what had happened, but the words wouldn't come. They didn't believe me, of course. How could they? Who would? I couldn't even explain it to myself. All I knew was that the craft was still out there, somewhere, watching, waiting, and so was that thing, the creature. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still with me, in my mind, in my thoughts. I couldn't escape it. It was like I had been marked, branded with the knowledge of something far beyond this world, something I wasn't meant to understand. I don't know how I got back to my unit, or how long I had been gone. I don't even know if any of it was real, but I can tell you this. I never felt more alone than I did that day. The world around me, the people I knew, it all felt so distant, so hollow. Like I was still stuck in that place, caught between two worlds, unable to escape. I don't know if I ever will. That was over a month ago, and I still can't get the images out of my head. The creature's eyes, the hum of the ship, the way time seemed to stretch and bend around me. I still see it sometimes in the corner of my eye, lurking just beyond the edge of my vision. I hear that hum in my head when it's quiet, like it's following me, waiting for me to slip. I've tried to go back to normal life, but it's impossible. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back in that place, staring into those black, empty eyes, hearing that mechanical hum, feeling that cold, suffocating presence closing in around me. I can't escape it. It's like it's a part of me now, embedded in my mind, and no matter how hard I try to forget, it keeps coming back. Maybe that's the worst part of it, the not knowing, the not understanding what happened, what I was a part of. I don't know if anyone else experienced what I did, or if they even could. All I know is that the moment I was pulled out of that jungle, I was never the same. And maybe that's the scariest thing of all, that some things don't go away. They stay with you, buried deep inside, waiting for you to remember. I tried to talk to some of the guys about it, but they looked at me like I was crazy. They said I was just exhausted, that I must have hallucinated. I couldn't even explain it, because part of me still wonders if it was all a dream, a nightmare that somehow became real. But there are moments, quiet, still moments, when I feel like I'm being watched, like someone or something is waiting for me to slip up. I can't shake the feeling that whatever happened to me, whatever I saw, it's still out there. Somewhere. I still hear that hum sometimes in the dead of night. It's soft at first, like a whisper, but then it gets louder, clearer, until it fills my ears, and I know it's coming back. I don't know why it's waiting or what it wants from me, but I know I'm not safe. And neither is anyone else. I don't know if I'll ever be able to move on from this, or if I even want to. I'm stuck between two realities, one where I was just a soldier, and one where I'm marked by something beyond understanding. All I know is that I'll never be the same. It's been years now. I've tried to tell myself it was just a bad experience, something I misinterpreted, but deep down I know it wasn't. I've tried to live my life, to forget, but that's impossible. The nightmares haven't stopped, and every time I close my eyes, I'm still back in that desert, still staring into the abyss. I've even tried to find answers, tried to look for others who might have had the same experience, but it's like everyone's too afraid to speak up. I don't know why they took me or what they wanted, but I can't help but feel like I'm still part of something much bigger than myself. The craft is still out there, and so are the creatures, and I can't help but wonder if it's only a matter of time before they come back for me. I don't know if I'm ready to face that again, but I know I don't have a choice. Something tells me it's not over yet. I'll never know why they chose me, why I was brought there. But I do know this: I'll never be free from it. No one ever is. Second story: The Alien Mystery of the Pacific, 1943. I was part of the crew on a Navy ship stationed in the Pacific during 1943, right in the middle of World War II. The sky that day was clear, almost unnaturally so, like something was holding its breath. We were about 100 miles out from the Philippines when it happened. It started with a sudden sharp radar ping. We were used to tracking enemy vessels, but this was different. An object wasn't just moving, it was submerged deep under the water. We didn't know what to make of it. It wasn't one of our submarines. The thing was metallic, too reflective for its size. I remember hearing the officer in charge whisper something about the possibility of an enemy sub being detected, but no one had ever heard of anything like this before. A metallic object not showing up on our normal radar screens, but somehow making its presence known. It was eerie. The officers began talking in hushed voices, and the tension was thick, enough to cut with a knife. The crew was uneasy. I could feel it even in my bones. We didn't know what we were dealing with, but we were ordered to investigate. As we cruised closer, something felt off. Something just didn't sit right in the air. I've been on this ship for months, and I've never felt that kind of dread before. The men were nervous, their eyes constantly darting towards the ocean, scanning the horizon as though expecting something to leap from the water. That's when we lost Corporal Henry. He was on lookout duty, standing on the upper deck, just doing his job, like he did every day. At first, we thought he'd gone down below to get something, maybe a smoke or a drink. But after 15 minutes, there was no sign of him. The officers called for a head count, and that's when we realized Henry was gone. Not a single trace of him. The worst part, his post was just left behind. His binoculars were sitting on the railing. His hat was still on the ground next to them. But he was nowhere. No screams, no sounds. It was as if he just vanished. It's hard to explain the level of panic that set in. At first, we assumed he must have fallen overboard. But how? The water was calm, and no one heard a thing. They sent a small search party out, looking for him in the water, but there was nothing. No sign of a struggle, no splash, just nothing. And that's when I first heard the stories. The older men started whispering about strange things they had heard in the past, things they'd never shared with the younger crew. They spoke in low voices, but I caught enough to make my skin crawl. They talked about UFO sightings during previous missions, strange things that didn't make sense. They spoke of a fleet being watched by objects from the skies, metallic, silent, like they were observing us. I didn't believe it at first, you never do. But when I heard the stories about those objects, it all started to line up. The radar, Henry disappearing, the tension in the air. Something was out there. With us, something that didn't belong. We were being watched. But by what? And where had Henry gone? Was he taken? Or had something far worse happened? The uncertainty made it worse. The officers ordered a more thorough search. But by then, the atmosphere aboard the ship had shifted completely. It wasn't just fear, it was a palpable sense of helplessness. The ship felt smaller, like we were all trapped in the middle of something that no one could control or even understand. We couldn't stop, looking at the sea, waiting for something or someone to emerge. As night fell, the feeling only grew more intense. The sky, which had been clear all day, now seemed too quiet. There were no stars, just a thick, oppressive blackness. The radar picked up another anomaly, this time closer than before. It was moving fast, weaving erratically beneath the surface. The officers scrambled to find out what it was, but whatever it was out of our reach. And then the ship's lights flickered, briefly but long enough to send a chill down our spines. It was like someone was toying with us, turning the power off and on, making us feel exposed. It wasn't long before the first strange sounds started. At first, we thought it was just the ship creaking, or maybe some sort of mechanical malfunction. But this was different. It was deep and rhythmic, almost like a low humming, vibrating through the ship's hull. It wasn't natural. It felt wrong. We all gathered on the deck, looking out into the vast expanse of water, waiting for the next move. That's when I saw it. At first, it was just a blur, something moving at the edge of the horizon, almost blending in with the darkness. But as it came closer, it became clear. It was a shape, metallic and sleek, glowing faintly in the moonlight. It wasn't just hovering, it was darting across the water at impossible speeds, shifting and weaving like it was studying us. I heard gasps from the men around me as everyone tried to make sense of what we were seeing. We were frozen, unable to look away as the object grew closer. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished below the surface again, disappearing, as though it had never been there. But it wasn't gone. We all knew it was still out there, somewhere, watching us. The disappearance of Corporal Henry was never explained. In the days that followed, we found no trace of him, and no one dared to speak of it aloud again. But the tension never left. We all knew something was wrong. We tried to continue with our duties, but everything felt off. The search for Henry stopped, and the radar anomalies continued, but the officers seemed to try and sweep everything under the rug. They insisted it was just a malfunction, a blip on the radar, but none of us believed that. We knew what we saw, but what could we do? We were miles from shore, trapped on a ship in the middle of an ocean with something far beyond our understanding, lurking beneath us. After a while, it became a silent agreement among the crew to just push forward, to try and ignore the fear that had settled like a weight on our chests. But I don't think any of us ever forgot. Even now, decades later, I still hear the humming in my head sometimes, feel the eerie stillness of that night. The question remains, was it them? And if so, what do they want with us? After that night, we started getting reports from other ships in the area, but they were vague and scattered. Some mentioned similar radar anomalies, while others reported strange lights in the sky. But what got to me the most were the accounts from men who were stationed on the lookout posts, claiming to have seen something that couldn't have been from Earth. I didn't believe them at first, thinking maybe they were just as shaken as the rest of us. But then the whispers began. I heard from one man, a veteran, who said he'd seen something on the surface of the water. He couldn't describe it properly, but the way he looked at me, his eyes wide, his face pale, it sent a chill through me. He said it wasn't a ship or a submarine or anything he'd ever seen before. He said it was just wrong. I don't know what he meant by that, but I could see it in his face. He wasn't lying. Whatever we were dealing with, it wasn't from this world. The days stretched on and we kept our eyes peeled, but the ship started to feel like a prison. We were all jumpy, always looking over our shoulders, never fully relaxing. I started to have trouble sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear that hum, the low, throbbing sound that seemed to come from deep within the ship. I tried to tell myself it was just the engines or maybe the sound of the ocean, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. It was something else, something unnatural. The crew wasn't talking about it anymore, but I could tell they were feeling it too. The fear had taken hold of everyone. It was like we were all waiting for something to happen, but none of us wanted to be the first to acknowledge it. That's when the second strange disappearance occurred. This time it was Lieutenant Adams who had been on the radar station. The man was sharp, always on point, never one to slack off. But one morning, when we went to check in on him, his station was empty. His chair was pushed back, his radio was on, but no sign of him. The door to the radar room had been locked from the inside. And just like with Henry, there was no trace, no struggle, no sign of a fight. It was like he just vanished. By then, the paranoia was unbearable. We had no idea if we were being stalked by something in the water, or if we were simply going insane from the pressure. Officers were keeping things tight-lipped, but the crew was starting to crack. Men who had been strong and confident before were now acting strange, eyes wide, constantly checking over their shoulders, whispering to each other when they thought no one was listening. There was talk of returning to shore, but no one had the courage to speak it aloud. We were stranded in the middle of the ocean, and none of us knew who or what was out there with us. But that night, everything came to a head. I was on watch, with two other men, staring out into the blackness of the ocean, when it happened again. The hum started faint at first, but growing steadily louder. And then, just like before, the metallic object appeared in the sky, its shape unmistakable in the moonlight. It hovered for a moment, and then, without warning, it shot straight up into the air, leaving a streak of light that burned into the eye. Night. The object didn't make a sound, but its speed was enough to make your stomach drop. It was real. It was here. And now we had no idea what to do. After that night, I don't know what happened. Everything just went quiet. The hum stopped. The ship went dead silent, like we were all holding our breath, waiting for the next thing to happen. The object in the sky had disappeared, but it didn't feel like it was gone for good. It felt like it was just out of sight, somewhere, waiting. The officers started getting more secretive, and the crew was on edge. There was no more talk of radar anomalies or strange lights, but we all knew something was wrong. I tried to forget about it, to push it to the back of my mind, but it was impossible. Every time I looked out at the ocean, every time I heard the slightest creak from the ship, I wondered if something was watching us, if something had been watching us the whole time. No one spoke about the disappearances. No one spoke about the strange things we'd seen, but it hung in the air like a dark cloud, suffocating us all. We just kept going through the motions, trying to pretend everything was fine, but deep down, we all knew it wasn't. A week later, we finally got the call to return to port. I don't know if it was coincidence, or if someone higher up knew what had been happening, but the ship turned around and headed back toward land. By that point, I was relieved. I couldn't take the constant fear anymore. I just wanted to go home. But even as we sailed toward the shore, I kept looking back at the ocean, expecting to see something out there in the distance, something waiting for us. But there was nothing, just the dark expanse of the water. I tried to shake the feeling, to tell myself that whatever it was over, but I couldn't. The fear had crawled under my skin, and it hadn't left. The men around me felt it too. We were all quiet, too tired to speak, too scared to say what we were really thinking. No one asked questions about what had happened. We all just wanted to forget it. But I don't think I'll ever forget it. I don't think any of us will. When we finally made it back to land, I didn't say a word to anyone. I went straight to my barracks, locked the door, and collapsed into bed. I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to think about it. But that night when I lay there in the dark, I could still hear that hum in my ears. It was faint, almost like a memory, but it was there. I tried to tell myself it was just the sounds of the ship, but I knew it wasn't. Whatever had happened out there, whatever we had seen, wasn't over. I don't know why it hasn't left me. I don't know why it still haunts me, but I've never been the same since. The others never spoke of it either. We all went our separate ways, pretending like nothing happened. But deep down, I think we all knew we'd seen something we couldn't explain. Something that didn't belong on this earth. And I'll never forget it. Not ever. Over the years, I tried to tell myself it was just a bad experience. Something that had been blown out of proportion in the heat of war. But every time I hear a low hum, every time I look out at the ocean, I'm reminded of that night. The fear, the uncertainty, the feeling that we were being watched. It's always with me now. I've read about other people who've had similar experiences, and I can't help but think about them. I know I'm not the only one who's had something wrong happen, something they can't explain. But I wonder, what did we encounter out there, and why? I don't have any answers, and I don't think I ever will. But I can't forget what happened, and I can't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, they're still watching. Every now and then I'll hear stories from other veterans, some of them coming from ships stationed in the Pacific at the same time. Some of them are different, but the core is always the same, a strange object, something not from this world watching us. And sometimes I'll hear a story where someone went missing just like Henry, just like Adams. But no one ever gets any answers. There are whispers, rumors, but nothing concrete. I've even tried to talk to a few of the men I served with, but they just look away, like they're too afraid to speak of it. They know, like I know, that there are things out there that we'll never understand, things we're not supposed to see. But that doesn't stop the nightmares. They still come at night. Sometimes I'll wake up to the sound of that hum, my heart pounding in my chest, and I'll feel like I'm back on that ship again, staring into the darkness, waiting for the next thing to happen. And I wonder, if I closed my eyes, would I see it again? The object, the hum, the fear. Would I see it just like it was that night? I still don't know what happened out there. All these years later, I can't explain it. We were never given any answers, and I don't think we ever will be. The Navy never spoke of it again, and I've never heard of anyone else who experienced what we did. But I know what I saw, I know what I felt, and I know the fear that gripped me and the others that night. It wasn't just the war, it wasn't just a bad mission. It was something else, something that shouldn't exist. I still don't understand it, and I probably never will. But that's the thing about experiences like this. You can't explain them, and you can't forget them. They stay with you forever, and no matter how many years pass, you'll never feel the same again. If you're enjoying this and want to support the channel in bringing more chilling stories like this, any contribution is greatly appreciated. The donation link is just below this video. It's safe, easy, and fast. No registration required. Even the smallest support means so much. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Third story. The Golden Light. Sarajevo, 1995. I remember the night like it was yesterday, even though it happened all those years ago. We were stationed in Sarajevo, right in the middle of the conflict, and things were tense. It was a cold evening, the kind that gets into your bones, and we were just trying to keep our heads down. We had been on edge for days, and every little sound seemed to set us off. There had been some talk among the soldiers about strange occurrences around our camp, but nothing we could really point to. We laughed it off, but the unease lingered, especially after what happened to John. He was a tough guy, one of those no-nonsense types who never let anything get to him. But that night, he disappeared, just like that. No one saw him leave, no one saw him go anywhere. All we saw was that flash. It was around 3 a.m. when it happened. We were doing our usual patrol, scanning the area for movement, keeping our distance from any potential danger. Then out of nowhere there was a flash of light. It wasn't the usual lighting or the glow of distant fires. This was something completely different. It was a deep golden light, almost like it had its own pulse, its own rhythm. It wasn't like anything we had ever seen before. We all stopped dead in our tracks, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. And then, right before our eyes, John was caught in it. The light wrapped around him like a rope, and in that instant he was gone. Just like that. No sound, no scream, nothing. He just vanished. We were in shock, frozen in place. I can't really explain the feeling. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was more like a sense of complete helplessness, like we had no control over what was happening. The light faded as quickly as it had appeared, and John was just gone. We searched everywhere, called out for him, but there was nothing. It was as if the earth had swallowed him whole. Hours passed, but it felt like days. Finally, as the sun was beginning to rise, he reappeared. He didn't walk back to us or anything like that. One minute he wasn't there, and the next minute he was standing right in front of us, looking different. His eyes were wide, his face pale, and he didn't say a word. It was like he was in a daze. At first, we thought he might have been drugged or had some kind of mental break, but it was clear something was off. His eyes were glazed over like he wasn't seeing us. And then we noticed the marks on his skin, these perfectly circular, red, swollen patches. They were all over his body, some on his arms, his neck, and even his face. The marks were bizarre, too symmetrical, almost deliberate. It was like someone had branded him, but it wasn't any kind of mark we had ever seen. They looked unnatural, almost otherworldly. None of us knew what to say. We couldn't explain it. How do you explain something like that? John didn't speak for a long time after he came back. He just stared at the ground, his face contorted in confusion and fear. We tried to talk to him, to get him to open up about what had happened, but he wouldn't say a word. When we asked him what he remembered, he just shook his head. It was like he couldn't recall anything. There was this eerie silence around him, like he had seen something that had broken him in a way words couldn't fix. The more we tried to get answers, the more distant he became. It was as if he was still stuck in whatever had happened to him, like a part of him had stayed behind when the light pulled him away. The military doctors came to check on him, but they couldn't find any physical injuries other than the strange marks. They said the marks looked like some sort of radiation burns, but they didn't make sense either. There was no radiation in the area that could cause something like that. They also couldn't explain the fact that John had been gone for hours, but it felt like only minutes had passed for him. It was like time had warped. They kept him in a medical facility for observation, but he didn't get any better. His behavior only became more erratic. He would have these fits where he would scream about the light, the way it felt like it was pulling him in. He'd talk about hearing voices, but no one could understand what he meant. It was like he had been touched by something so terrifying, it had broken his mind. It wasn't long before strange things started happening around the camp. At night, we'd hear strange sounds, like humming or low buzzing noises that seemed to come from everywhere, and nowhere at once. It wasn't normal. I know what sounds a military camp should make: boots on the ground, the distant murmur of conversations, even the occasional rattle of equipment. But this was different. It was a kind of high-pitched whine that would echo through the air, sending a chill down your spine. It didn't feel like it was coming from any physical source. It felt like it was coming from the very air itself, vibrating with some unnatural energy. And sometimes, just before those noises started, I'd catch glimpses of strange lights in the distance. Faint glows in the sky, just like the one that took John. But by the time we would get to where we saw them, the lights would disappear, leaving only the silence and that creeping sense of dread behind. John, meanwhile, had become even more distant. He wouldn't speak to any of us, but we could see him staring off into the dark, his eyes wide, like he was waiting for something. One night, he slipped away from the camp, and I followed him. I couldn't help it. Something inside me told me I needed to know where he was going. Maybe I thought I could help him, or maybe I just needed to understand what had happened to him. I kept my distance, moving silently through the trees as he wandered through the woods. He didn't seem to be aware of me trailing behind him. His movements were jerky, almost mechanical, like he was being guided by something invisible. After what felt like hours, he finally stopped at a clearing, and that's when I saw it. The lights were back, but this time, they weren't just in the sky. They were right in front of us, hovering above the ground in a perfect circle. It was the same golden light, that same pulsating energy that had taken John before. But this time, it was different. There was something in the air, an intense, suffocating pressure, like the atmosphere itself was closing in around us. I felt it in my chest, the way my heart raced and my breath became shallow. I knew something was about to happen, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to look away. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the light vanished, leaving nothing behind but a strange sense of emptiness, like the whole world had been ripped out of place. When I woke up the next morning, I found myself lying in the same clearing where I had seen the lights. The air was thick with this unnatural stillness, as though the world was holding its breath. My mind was a fog, like I had been knocked out, but I couldn't remember how I had ended up on the ground. My body ached, especially my chest, like I had been weighed down by something heavy. I stumbled to my feet, trying to piece together the last few hours. But the more I tried to remember, the more fragmented everything became. It was like I was grasping at pieces of a shattered mirror, unable to put it all together. My heart was racing again, that same oppressive feeling hanging in the air. I made my way back to the camp, hoping to find John and get some answers. But when I arrived, I was met with a cold, empty camp. The soldiers were gone. Their gear had been left behind, abandoned in a hurry. I could see footprints in the dirt, leading away from the camp toward the forest. It didn't make sense. No one would just leave their post, not without a good reason. I followed the tracks, my mind racing with 1,000 possibilities, none of them comforting. And then, as I reached the edge of the trees, I saw something that made my stomach drop. There, in the distance, was John. He was standing in the same spot he had been the night before, staring at the sky, completely motionless. It was like he was waiting for something, or someone. I called out to him, but he didn't respond. It was like he couldn't hear me, or maybe he just didn't care. I approached cautiously, my steps hesitant as I tried to make sense of what was happening. As I got closer, I could see that his body was different. His skin was pale, almost ghostly white, and there were new marks on him, darker than before, more pronounced. His eyes were wide, but there was no recognition in them. He wasn't John anymore. It was like his soul had been drained out of him, leaving nothing behind but an empty shell. The feeling of dread was unbearable, and the urge to run was overwhelming. But I stayed, rooted to the spot, unable to tear my eyes away from the horror in front of me. At that moment, I felt something in the air shift, something cold, like a warning. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I had the sudden, overwhelming feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. I turned around, my heart racing as I scanned. The trees, the shadows stretching across the ground. But there was nothing, just the wind rustling through the leaves. I thought maybe I was losing it, but the feeling wouldn't go away. It was like the whole forest was watching me, waiting for something. And then I heard it. A soft hum coming from the direction of John. It wasn't the buzzing I had heard before, but something different, something more mechanical. I couldn't tell where it was coming from, but it felt like it was all around me, pressing in. I glanced back at John, and that's when I saw it. His body was trembling. He hadn't moved, but the way his limbs shook made it look like he was fighting against something invisible. I took a step back, my legs unsteady as I tried to make sense of what was happening. My thoughts were a jumble, spinning out of control. I knew I had to get out of there, but I couldn't move. I couldn't tear my eyes away from him. It felt like if I did, something worse would happen. The hum grew louder, vibrating through my chest, making my heart feel like it was going to explode. And then, just like before, the light appeared. It was exactly the same as that night. The golden, pulsating beam that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once. But this time it wasn't just John. The light engulfed the entire clearing, wrapping itself around the trees, the ground, the air. I couldn't see anything except that light, and it felt like it was suffocating me. My vision blurred, and the last thing I remember was the sound, the horrible, hollow hum filling my ears, drowning everything else out. When I woke up, I was back in the camp, but everything had changed. The soldiers had returned, but they didn't recognize me. They didn't know who I was. It was like I had never been there at all. They kept asking who I was, why I was in the camp, but the more I tried to explain, the more confused they became. They said I had been gone for days, but it felt like it had only been hours. And then there was the silence. No one spoke about what happened. Not a word. As the days went by, I could feel it. Something had shifted. I wasn't the same, and neither was John. I saw him once more, walking through the camp like a shadow. But when our eyes met, there was nothing there. He was gone in a way that words can't explain. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know what we saw or what took him, but the fear, the terror, it's still there, lingering just below the surface. I don't think I'll ever understand it, and I don't know if I even want to. Whatever it wasn't human, and it's still out there waiting. So, what did you think of this story? Did it scare you? Was there a part that gave you chills or stuck with you the most? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below. If you've had a similar experience or have suggestions for improving future videos, let me know too. Thank you for watching and being part of this amazing community. See you in the next story.